Even kijken naar de techniek. Ja, zeggen ze. Nou, hartstikke goed. Er lopen nog wat mensen binnen, maar de deur is dicht. Maar ik neem aan dat er mensen nog achterlangs stiekem door kunnen lopen. Welkom bij de Academie IT en Media Design van de Han University of Applied Science. Mijn naam is Astrid Hoge. Ik ben academiedirecteur van deze mooie academie. Welcome at the University of Applied Science, the Academy of IT and Media. Today I will be in Dutch. And for our foreign and English-speaking guests, translation will be written on the boards and online in the screen. Vandaag mag ik jullie welkom heten bij de installatie van Eric Velleman als bijzonder lector Inclusive Digital Design and Engineering. Welkom aan de familie van Eric, Mijntje, zoon Reinoud, Florence en Laurens, ergens online. Een bijzonder welkom ook aan de collega's van Eric, van expertiseorganisatie Bartimeus en stichting Accessibility. Welkom aan alle sprekers en gasten hier aanwezig in de aula en alle deelnemers online. And last but not least, a special welcome to all international guests. Jullie zijn vandaag de gast bij de Academie IT en Media Design. Een academie die bestaat sinds 2020. Best kort. Het jaar dat ik begon als academiedirecteur van deze mooie club. En in datzelfde jaar kwam via ons inmiddels oud-lector Thea van der Geest bij mij de vraag of we geïnteresseerd waren in een bijzonder lector. Een bijzonder lector die de aanvulling op het thema mediadesign van toegevoegde waarde kon zijn in vraagstukken rondom inclusief digitaal ontwerpen. Ja, dat was een vraag waarom ik alleen maar heel enthousiast ja kon zeggen. Inclusiviteit is voor veel mensen een hele belangrijke maatschappelijke waarde. Voor mij betekent inclusief ontwerpen vooral een zienswijze die bijdraagt aan het breder toegankelijk maken van onze digitale wereld. Een wereld waarbinnen we producten en diensten moeten ontwikkelen voor iedereen. Daar waar we vroeger in de IT-sector spraken over mobile first, dat is al even geleden. Hoe ontwikkel je iets voor een klein schermpje dat ook op een webbrowser te gebruiken is inclusive digital design voor mij de maatschappelijke invulling van het ontwerpen met de meeste restricties om toegankelijkheid voor een zo breed mogelijk publiek mogelijk te maken. Een hele logische stap en aanvulling voor onze studenten en projecten in de academie en uiteraard voor de hele Han. Voor onze academie sluit het bijzonder lectoraat en daarmee de samenwerking met Bartimeus ontzettend goed aan. Niet alleen omdat wij in hart en nieren een digitale academie zijn, maar ook en vooral omdat onze studenten deel uitmaken van een generatie die juist maatschappelijk relevant ontwikkelt en onderzoekt. ICT en media design studenten leiden we op om toekomstige producten en diensten zo vorm te geven of te ontwikkelen dat ze voor een zo groot mogelijke groep mensen in de samenleving bruikbaar zijn. Onze studenten zijn namelijk changemakers. Zij ontwikkelen met veel passie hun talent om de wereld elke dag een stukje beter te maken. Inclusive Digital Design en Engineering sluit bijzonder goed aan bij onze bestaande lectoraten. In de eerste plaats Media Design, het lectoraat dat iets meer dan een maand geleden afscheid heeft genomen van Thea. Maar, zij was het die zo enthousiast Erik aan ons heeft voorgesteld. Maar het lectoraat Media Design wordt inmiddels geleid door Wouter Sluis-Tischiever, met dezelfde passie voor het centraal stellen van eindgebruikers in het ontwerpen van digitale middelen voor een breed publiek. Ontwerpmethodieken waarbij de gebruiker centraal staat is een belangrijke pijler in het onderzoek en onderwijs van onze academie. Daarnaast hebben we het lectoraat van Stijn Hoppenbrouwers, Model-Based Information Systems, met een focus op data science en AI. Inhoudelijke data engineering en inclusief digitaal ontwerpen zijn aanpalende onderwerpen waar studenten in onze opleidingen, HBO ICT en Communication en Multimedia Design, elkaar in projecten ook vinden. En tenslotte, René Bakker, onze leading lector en aanvoerder van het lectoraat Networked Applications. Wij waren allemaal groot voorstander en trekker van dit bijzonder lectoraat. Snel hebben we aan Erik ons voorstel van een bijzonder lectoraat bij de Academie IT en Media Design aan de Han gepresenteerd. Heel snel. Als kwartiermaker van het nieuwe lectoraat heeft hij voortvarend de inrichting en strategische waarden voor de Han en de regio in kaart gebracht. En dat allemaal midden in de coronaperiode. We vonden elkaar op inhoud en het enthousiasme voor het onderwerp. Erik heeft in no time aansluiting gevonden op de Han. Prioriteit van het bijzonder lectoraat en Erik is de toepassing van digital design in Fair Health, een van onze zwaartepunten op de Han. Met name op de onderdelen inclusief onderwijs en werk en toegankelijke informatie en voorzieningen. Daarmee sluit het lectoraat bijzonder goed aan. Samen trekken we op in projecten waarin verschillen in de samenleving kleiner gemaakt kunnen worden. Erik heeft al verschillende projectonderdelen in het onderwijs in onze opleiding Communication en Multimedia Design weten te mobiliseren. In combinatie met internationale aanvragen op het gebied van onder andere 2 Next Generation Internet NGI projecten en een Y-Coop-traject. En er zitten nog een 2-tal NGI-projecten in de pijplijn. Daarmee verrijken we ons onderwijs voor de studenten en borduren we voort op de driehoek onderwijs, onderzoek en bedrijfsleven. Vanmiddag in de break geven ook studenten van een aantal van deze projecten presentaties voor de aanwezigen. Ik wil jullie ook meenemen in een passage uit het hoofdlijnenbeleid voor digitalisering van de overheid. Dat ingaat op het belang van digitale inclusiviteit. Daarom werkt het kabinet aan een toegankelijke, begrijpelijke en gebruiksvriendelijke overheidsdienstverlening waarbij burgers en bedrijven centraal staan. Mensen die vastlopen kunnen voor hulp en persoonlijk contact terecht bij informatiepunten digitale overheid. En we gaan aan de slag met de implementatie van de European Accessibility Act. Een heel belangrijk onderwerp in Eriks lectoraat. Het ontwikkelen van digitale vaardigheden kan ook positief bijdragen aan sociaal-economische zekerheid van mensen. Ik denk een belangrijke quote uit dit stuk van de overheid. De snelheid, Erik, waarmee we de vraag onderzochten of we een bijzonder lectoraat wilden, was eind 2020 hoog. Mede dankzij ons eigen enthousiasme, dat van Bartimeus, en niet in de minste plaats de enorme drive en positieve energie van Erik, staan we hier vandaag op deze heugelijke dag om Erik officieel bij ons te verwelkomen. Je was natuurlijk al gestart, maar... En nu, voordat Erik zijn intrede houdt, is een aantal interessante sprekers aan het woord. Graag geef ik daarom ook het woord aan onze eerste spreker, Raf. Mag ik jou op het podium vragen om ons mee te nemen in jouw verhaal. Ik wens iedereen een hele prettige middag toe.
Dank u wel. Good afternoon. Well, 2 days ago I got a call from Eric and he told me I have to held my speech in English. So, no pressure. My name is Raf de Rooij. I'm the Policy Officer on Digital Accessibility and User Centricity at the Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations. Yes, I've written it down because I'm not that comfortable that I will know everything that I'm going to talk about. Okay. Nice. Yeah. I would like to start with a tweet that a Dutch member of parliament posted yesterday. This tweet effectively illustrates why we are gathered here today. This is a tweet by Lucille Werner. She is a member of parliament and she wrote, for people who can't read Dutch, last night I was a guest at Casa BNN-Vara about digital accessibility. The gap between people who can and cannot participate is widening. That is why the CDA, that is the political party, wants a government commissioner for accessibility. Parliamentary questions asked, curious about the response of the cabinet. Well, yesterday night I received the questions, so we are going to answer them in due time. In the Netherlands, it is not exceptional that members of parliament ask questions or even submit motions about the accessibility of websites and mobile applications. Unfortunately, and that's really unfortunately, the results often don't meet their expectations. The reasoning behind making websites accessible is rather straightforward. We have a well-documented and widely accepted set of requirements in a formal web accessibility standard. Just apply that standard and you're done, right? Well, not exactly. Yes, we do have an excellent standard, and yes, it is widely accepted. So the questions arise, why are so few websites fully accessible? And for the answer to these questions, we have to go back to the 90s of the past century. An alternative is to read Eric's dissertation for more details, because he explains it very well there. Well, the 90s. After Tim Berners-Lee finished his development of the World Wide Web in 1989, the 90s was the decade in which the web gained traction. The very first web pages were very basic and could only be viewed with a text browser. That changed when Mosaic came onto the scene in 1993. It was a graphical browser that allowed content creators to integrate graphical content such as images and multimedia, and allowed designers to style content. The second big change was in December 1995, when browser maker Netscape introduced JavaScript. This meant that developers could add interaction and other behavior to the web. And the third big change was 1 year later, with the introduction of CSS, cascading style sheets. Web content became a lot fancier in just a couple of years, and more complicated, and also considerably less accessible. Well, in 1998, the United States government acknowledged this by introducing new legislation, an amendment of Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, that explicitly included digital content. And prior to that, development of automated accessibility test tools had gained popularity. One of the earliest ones was Bobby. It was developed by the Center for Applied Special Technology, CAST. And I'm just curious, is there anyone who knows Bobby? Oh, that's good. And is there anyone who has ever used Bobby? Oh, only 4. That's a lot less. So now you can see who the old-timers are in this group. Yeah. In the meantime, the World Wide Web Consortium, led by Mr. Tim Berners-Lee, developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, or WCAG, as the in crowd pronounce it. The WCAG version 1 was published in May 1999. And 10 months later, in March 2000, as I recall it well, yeah, 2 teachers from the Bartimeus Institute for the Blind and Partially Sighted in Zeist finished a book about web accessibility. The title, Sightseeing. Authors were Eric Velleman, a geography teacher, and Henk Snetzelaar, his colleague, and an ICT coordinator at that time, right? Yeah. It was really difficult to find a picture of the book that was sharp enough. So luckily I have a copy at home, and I made a picture this morning. There's a nice anecdote about the book presentation, because I found an email to the W3C a couple of months later in which Eric wrote, and this is really interesting, when we recently presented our book, Sightseeing, to His Royal Highness Prince Bernhard of the Dutch Royal House, we asked him to pull out the mouse plug and tap his way to the page we wanted him to open. It was quite an eye-opener to him and to many others in the room. Remember that? Yeah. And yeah, Sightseeing was well received and attracted the attention of the State Secretary responsible for the disability policy at the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport. And in order to prevent the gap between people with and without disabilities in the digital world, the ministry decided to emphasize the importance of web accessibility through the Drempelsweg project. Drempelsweg means thresholds away, which started in 2001. In the letter to Parliament about Drempelsweg, State Secretary Margot Vliegendhart wrote, right now, in 2001, she wrote, right now, the effort we have to put in to make the internet accessible for everyone is manageable. The longer we wait, the harder it gets. Mind you, that's 21 years ago. Well, the sentence has proven to be true over and over again. That's not a really good thing. At the start of Drempelsweg, I met Eric for the first time, and Eric was introduced as the director of the Accessibility Foundation, which was founded a year earlier. And in the years that followed, we met on a regular basis and cooperated on countless occasions. Eric in the role of web accessibility expert and sometimes as a web accessibility advocate, and myself trying to change the government from within. Examples of our cooperation are the work in the expert group of the drempelvrij, the threshold-free quality mark, the Dutch web guidelines, the ministerial decree that made accessibility mandatory for public sector bodies belonging to the central government, and work for mandate 376. The development of version 2 of the web guidelines, they were based on WCAG 2, the web accessibility conformance evaluation methodology in 2014, research into the accessibility of Dutch government websites, the EIII research project for the European Commission, and last December the progress report for the European Commission based on the Web Accessibility Directive. That was just a few months ago. Because we work from a different perspective, Eric and I didn't and still don't always agree on accessibility-related subjects. But that is a good thing. That really is a good thing, because the most important benefits from discussions are that it leads to a better understanding of problems, new insights, new ideas, and new solutions. And that is exactly what digital accessibility needs. Solving the digital accessibility puzzle appears to be simple, but in reality it isn't. The longer you're involved with digital accessibility, the more you realize that it has all the characteristics of a wicked problem. Eric, I'm really glad that today you are installed as Professor of Inclusion Digital Design and Engineering. It is the perfect position to pass on your knowledge and experience to the accessibility experts of tomorrow and educate them about the wickedness of digital accessibility so that they can contribute to the goal that anyone, regardless of disability, is able to optimally participate in the digital world. Best of luck.
Mijn naam is Fred Hissink, 56 jaar oud. Ik zie nog maar 15%. 5 jaar geleden verminderde mijn zicht binnen 14 dagen van 100 naar die 15%. Een van de zaken waar ik in het dagelijks leven tegenaan loop is de slechte toegankelijkheid van websites. Bijvoorbeeld de website van de Belastingdienst of websites van andere semi-overheidsinstanties. Vaak zijn deze websites met spraaksoftware niet goed toegankelijk. Hele stuk tekst worden overgeslagen en het kost heel veel energie om de juiste informatie te vinden. Beste Erik, hoe kun jij met je lectoraat ervoor zorgen dat deze websites goed toegankelijk worden voor onze doelgroep?
We hebben nog 2 sprekers, waarvan de eerste ook nog hier is en de derde straks online. Ruben, mag ik jou het sprekersgestoelte geven?
Ik weet niet of mijn microfoon het inmiddels doet. Ja, volgens mij doet hij inmiddels wel. Deze is voor mij, ja. Hallo allemaal, goedemiddag. It's in English today. My speech is about digital inclusion and the power of the phenomenon called disability. So dear Eric, Eric loved ones and his appreciated colleagues, it is a great honor for me to hold this talk on Eric's special day. My talk is an attempt to appeal to our society's imagination and to shift the narrative related to disability in the digital realm and to show what Eric and his past and future work symbolizes for me. Due to personal and technical reasons, I was restrained, so you could say that I was temporarily technologically disabled in the production of this talk. Therefore, I will quote some building blocks of the talk that I've set myself to give today. Nou, wordt het spannend? Ja, right. I don't think I gave an introduction, so my role is I'm a chair of Internet Society Netherlands, but it will become clear. So, as Eric states in his dissertation, the implementation of web accessibility standards by Dutch municipalities, factors of resistance and support, And many studies look into web accessibility implementation focus on compliance theory based on a more normative approach of the problem. Is the law applied? Are the standards applied? According to the European Commission, around 80 million people in the European Union are to some degree affected by disability, and the aging population will further increase that number to over 120 million by 2020. If we want all these people to fully and equally participate in society, we need to ensure that our society is inclusive. Accessibility is a fundamental aspect of the modern information and knowledge society that is recognized by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities as a basic human right. Still, the minister concludes that municipalities, provinces, water boards, non-departmental public bodies, and central government agencies' websites fail to conform to the required quality and accessibility standard. And this means that the internet, created to offer equal opportunities for all users, including users with disabilities, has become a medium that creates a digital divide that excludes large groups of users. And the UN Convention defines persons with disability as persons who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Disability is defined as an evolving concept, that disability results from the interaction between persons with impairments and additional attitudinal environmental barriers that hinders their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. And this I like very much, as it is central to my view on shifting the narrative on disabilities, especially in the digital dimension that has penetrated nearly all aspects of life of our planet. On the web pages, the W3C continues to describe a diversity of disabilities, where websites and web tools that are designed for people with a broad range of abilities benefit everyone, including people without disabilities. And specifically interesting is the addition in the term situational disability by W3C and Forrester. And the Forrester report refers to 3 types of disabilities, and the last one is situation disability. And situation disability is described as a more generic accessibility requirement for a specific use case not tied to disability. For example, a natural circumstance might limit a person's ability, such as a glare of the sun, making it hard to read a screen, or a loud environment limiting hearing. And most people will probably recognize these examples from their own experience. It is not a disability, but it can be an additional driver for accessibility. For example, if video is played in a loud environment like trade shows or a cafe, it helps to have captations, ondertiteling. And at the same time, captations make the video accessible for video who have a hearing impairment. De Andres describes this as, although initially intended to benefit users with disabilities, it can also contribute to enhancing the relationship between a certain organization and people without disability in certain situations. And this could also include recent migrants and people with limited access to the internet. So what is then a disability? And as stated on the inauguration website, it is inclusive. It refers to inclusive digital design, and engineering seems simple because it is written in the law. So here I would like to introduce the concept of rule of a higher law and equality before the law. So the rule according to a higher law is a statement that expresses that no law may be enforced by the government unless it conforms with certain universal principles of fairness, morality, and justice. Thus, the rule according to the higher law may serve as a practical legal criterion to qualify the instances of political and economical decision-making when a government, even though acting in conformity with clearly defined and properly enacting legal rules, still produces results which many observers find unfair, and unjust. Pardon. Equality before the law is the principle that all people must be equally protected by the law. And the principle requires a systematic rule of law that observes the due process to provide legal justice and requires equal protection, ensuring that no individual nor group of individuals be privileged over others by the law. So, how can we then attain equality before the law to inspire lawmakers? And for many within the community, disability is more than just a diagnosis. Disability is a complicated, multifaceted identity that many individuals value and hold dear. Not every disabled person wants to be fixed. A great quote I bumped into while writing this talk states, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude." So, to attain the right attitude, we need to expand our consciousness through broader awareness. Consciousness. Eric concludes in his dissertation that 5 factors demonstrably increase or decrease the chance of successful application of web accessibility standards. And it concerns the following processes. There are 5. 1, involvement of top management. 2, adjusting the organizational structure. 3, monitor and reporting. 4, applying information systems. But also 5, developing awareness and knowledge. So I will focus this talk on the last aspect, as I believe that the thing or the phenomenon that is called disability can be inspiration for all, especially in this digital age. And to fortify my conviction, I find proof in the relationship between the state of technology and science fiction. Not only we must recognize how the current state of technological affairs is constantly influenced by the imagination ignited by science fiction, it also is important to acknowledge that for suitable inclusion, all actors in the ecosystem, regardless of the diversity in abilities, must be able to recognize themselves in the narrative of digital life. So, disability representation in science fiction typically signifies both the limits of human boundaries as well as the innovations beyond those boundaries. And in this perspective, I encourage you to read Hannah Tweed's work, Disability in Science Fiction, Representations of Technology as a Cure. In particular, the idea of disability in science fiction as an inclusive community of human belonging is repeatedly emphasized. And it is no secret that disability representation is severely lacking in the film and television industry. So, like any other community, disabled people need to see themselves on both the small and big screen. And if you don't see yourself, you feel invisible and unseen. And science fiction has the ability to construct worlds that stretch beyond human expectations and structural limitations, and with a novel vision of disability representation on screen. The science fiction world can therefore be a welcoming home for characters with disabilities, and therefore fans with disabilities as well. So there's nothing better than seeing yourself represented in a positive light, and that's exactly what these characters do for our community at large. And there are some great examples that have inspired me to work in the tech world. So if you're a fan of Star Trek, you likely remember The Next Generation from the 1980s, when George LaForge, portrayed by the African-American actor LeVar Burton, was a character on the show. And George was the chief engineering officer on the spaceship, and thus was often portrayed repairing machines or discovering new scientific phenomena. George LaForge was completely blind. And in most shows, this may have been a topic of doubt, suspicion, and annoyance by the character, but instead, the episodes written for him were just like he was just another crew member, with his blindness only being referred to on a rare basis. And this is exactly how people with disabilities would love to be treated in real life. This is why Star Trek was so far ahead of the diversity inclusion game that has become very relevant for social justice, innovation, and economic prosperity in the Netherlands. Because the show was also quite progressive when it came to race and gender in its characteristics as well. George's colleague, although another Star Trek series, was the autistic alien and genius, Mr. Spock, part human, part Vulcan. And the representation of autistic characters on screen throughout the film and television industry is few and far between, and that's no different in science fiction. So, neurotypical persons get to watch all possible versions of themselves on screen at any given time. As a human, as an alien, as a robot, in a position of power, or at the bottom of the career food chain, as a genius, or decidedly not, funny, serious, kind, or any other number of characteristics. And autistic people deserve the same level of representation too. They deserve to be able to see themselves on screen in characters that aren't only coded as autistic and that aren't aliens, robots, or geniuses. They deserve to be able to see themselves on screen in characters that encompass any and all possible facets of what it is like to be autistic. But in examining the characteristics of Mr. Spock, it also becomes clear why so many autistic people feel such an affinity towards him. The appeal to logic at all times, to keep your strong emotions and self locked inside, can be understood to be a form of masking. The bigotry and lack of understanding from even the most well-intended of humans and friends is something autistic people are keenly familiar with. And the aversion to touch, as a result of strong telepathic inclinations, as an element of sensory processing disorder, something that many autistic people experience to some extent. So, while talking about telepathic abilities, brings me to the last character. Professor Xavier of the X-Men with a disability paraplegia is a mutant who possesses vast telepathic powers. Therefore, is among the strongest and most powerful telepaths in the Marvel universe. Interestingly, this character was recently portrayed by Sir Patrick Stewart, who also played the role of Captain Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek, The Next Generation. So, thanks in part to Patrick Stewart's performances in The Wheelchair, Professor Xavier remains one of the best-known X-Men, and his philosophy of acceptance gives the science fiction narrative its most important message. Professor X was not always disabled in the series. However, he becomes paralyzed when his legs are crushed by an alien scout named Lucifer. What is wonderful about Professor X's character is that he's highly respected and one of the most intelligent characters on the show, with a disability not hindering whatsoever. In fact, his disability makes him somewhat more respected and perhaps more stable, as he's able to be more observant. As the founder of Xavier's School of Gifted Youngsters, he has gathered and protected vulnerable children with mutant genes and is able to be there for them with advice and guidance, constantly thanks to his psychic abilities. For his noble work, Professor X uses a device called Cerebro, Spanish Portuguese for brain, a fictional device that amplifies the brain wave of the user. And in the case of telepaths, it enables the user to detect traces of others worldwide and also able to distinguish between humans and mutants. Cerebro was also a great inspiration for my work at Internet Society. As some of you might know, I'm also the founder of the Internet Society Make Media Great Again, MMGA working group. With this annotation platform, both based on the W3C web annotation protocol and blockchain technology, in which hundreds of screened and trained expert or critical thinking readers can provide constructive feedback on high-impact news sites concerning the use of sources and other quality aspects of news articles to correct misinformation and combat disinformation, fake news. So nu.nl and AD.nl, two of the big four largest Dutch online news platforms, have previously signed up as a co-development partner. The working group focuses on collaboration with impactful media and scientists, but also building an MMJ community consisting of critical thinking citizens, an expert called annotators. And the annotations are practical suggestions in the forms of labeled notes, directly attributed to words, and the working group has access to the worldwide community of 65,000 ISOC members to tackle poor journalism and fake news, and provide an impactful voice for marginalized communities. So, the people who we attract as annotators have been identified with nowadays, in this age of infodemic and fake news, very relevant and special skill. critical thinking. And some people, often the most productive ones in the annotators community, sometimes label themselves with disabilities, either physically, because they're at home or they're in a wheelchair, or cognitive, for instance, autism. So when envisioning our annotation platform, we had Cerebro in mind to find and recruit the most critical thinking minds on the planet. Nu wordt het echt spannend. Ja.
You want me to leave? No. Just don't move. These lights represent every living person on the planet. The white lights are humans. And these are the mutants. Through Cerebro, I'm connected to them. And they to me. You see, Logan, we're not as alone as you think.
I found the base at Alkali Lake. There was nothing there.
The broken line represents the path of the mutant who attacked the president. I've been finding it difficult to get a lock on him.
Well, can't you just concentrate harder?
If I wanted to kill him, yes. Looks like he's finally stopped running.
Ist gebenedeit unter den Frauen und gebenedeit ist die Frucht.
I need you to read my mind again.
Logan. I'm afraid the results will be the same as before.
We had a deal.
The mind is not a box that can be simply unlocked and opened. It's a beehive with a million different
Spare me the
buttons.
lectures.
I have no doubt that your amnesia, your adamantium skeleton, the claws are all somehow connected, but Logan, sometimes the mind needs to discover things for itself.
So without the framework provided by science fiction, we probably would have not been able to shape our ideas on the communal values of our disabled annotators. And we have Professor X to thank for that. But in all modesty of all our MMGA efforts at Internet Society, we must now conclude that our society has found in Eric Martin Velleman a new Professor X, who uses his new chair at the Han University of Applied Sciences not only to be an advocate for so-called less abled persons, but also to find and enhance all minds of our digital world, to discover society's hidden innovative value by embracing diversity of abilities. Thank you for accepting this so much needed role, dear Eric, and our sincere congratulations on your inauguration.
Dankjewel, Ruben. Thank you very much for this new insights on a new Mr. X. Now we have an online speaker. I will do it in English a bit because I have a lot of praise for our translator online who tries to keep up with the speed of the quick-speaking speakers. Ima, can I give you the word online?
Sure, I'm connected. Okay, thank you very much first to Eric for the invitation to participate in this very important event. I would like, of course, to start by congratulating Eric for his new chair. I think that it is really a remarkable development, not only on the personal level for Eric, but also for the field, because there are not so many professors on accessibility in the world. So congratulations, Eric, for this pioneer work. Well, Eric asked me to tell something about the European regulatory approach, the experiences regarding accessibility and new media and technology. And I have to say, I have prepared some words for you, and they really fit very well with the presentations provided by previous speakers. In fact, I really enjoyed previous presentations going back into history, and I'm going to do a little bit of the same. And you will see that we have some common views, but also some different insights that I would like to share with you. I will also go back to the 90s, because that is when I also started working on accessibility and, or let's say, not on accessibility, but on technology for persons with disabilities and older persons. At that time, and I say this for those who are young, and I hope all the young people participating in the room, there was no internet. Difficult to picture our daily lives without internet. There was also no visual interfaces. I mean, everything was done to discuss with, or to work with computers through a command line. One line was the only thing we could feed the computers. And in fact, it was a very easy interface for persons with disabilities. Because it was really just text that you put in one line, no distraction about other things. In those days, the concept of disability was really a very medical concept. We were looking to or a focus on the impairments. What is the impairment that a person has, and let's try to fix it. That is very different from the concept that we have today. Where, and one of the previous speakers read the concept of disability that is in the convention, resulting from the interaction between impairments and barriers. And that is something that really radically changed the approach that we had on the use of technology for persons with disabilities, because a focus started to shift from the impairment to the barriers in the environment. So at the time in the 90s, what we were doing, we were at European level, we had a very interesting program, pioneer program called TIDE. Yes, like the washing powder, TIDE, Technology Initiative for Disabled and Elderly. And we had hundreds of projects with many different ideas that carried out by universities, researchers all over Europe. But usually those projects ended with a prototype after the end of the research fund was finished. And those projects had difficulties in reaching out the reality of persons with disabilities. And every time what we saw is that when these, let's say, technological gadgets, very interesting ones, really, robotic arms, artificial vision, but they were really separated gadgets from the mainstream. And when technology evolved, those devices did not work any longer, and the development had to start it all over again. There was no link at all with the mainstream technologies. So towards the end of the 90s, also, as previous speakers have said, several important developments took place. We had the web, we had, and we had PCs all over the place. I mean, imagine that in the end of the 80s, I know the Netherlands was most developed than my own country where I studied in Spain, but we were using punched cards, and the PC was not there. We really had difficulties, and people did not have personal computers at hand. So, as I was saying, at the end of the 90s, this change really, technology changed really the way in which our lives, it really shaped societies with technology really all over the place, but also some legislative developments. And here I would like to again joined myself with the previous speaker referring to the developments in the US. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act was mentioned. It was a paradigm shift in terms of accessible technology because it required the public administration, the US public administration, only to buy accessible technology, only to buy technology when it was accessible. And we have to remember that the US was the biggest purchaser of technology in the world at the time. So the impact was really, really significant. It was really a very, very important development. We also had an incredible development in terms of accessibility. The W3C way was also mentioned, but also in terms of technology. The power of technology in terms of artificial intelligence, sensors, actuators. I know that artificial intelligence is very much, and we have evolved a lot, but already in the 90s, we were talking about it, and there were important developments. Robotics, optical character recognition, image recognition. It was really an important coming together of the evolution of technology together with a policy development. And yes, answering to the previous speaker, I remember Bobby. I used Bobby in the first websites that were coming out. And at that time, we also counted with, as it has been mentioned, W3C way that started to develop at the end of the 90s, the web accessibility standards. At that time, let me recall that we had a study, looking forward a study at the beginning of the web, looking at the potential of the internet for persons with disabilities. And the conclusion of the study was, well, yes, this is a technology that has a lot of potential, but there is one problem. Who is going to be putting content on the web for free? This is an answer that now will make us laugh, but it was a question at the beginning. So we went from one extreme to the other with these evolutions, from assistive technology, so gadgets technology aimed to compensate impairments, to design for all, the concept of design for all and universal design. And there were, it was really very fashionable to talk about design for all only. And there was the perception by some experts that technology will solve all the impairments and it will not be needed anymore to compensate or to rehabilitation, to provide rehabilitation to people, because technology will do everything for us, for those that have any kind of disability. Of course, this turns out not to be the truth, and we have a more pragmatic and realistic approach today. At the end of the 90s, as I said, we had the emergence of W3C way, and persons like Judy Brewer, with whom Eric has been working a lot with, got in touch with us. We were in touch at the Commission, and we were already maturing the idea that we needed to do something more than just finance these research projects. But there were very few people working there. I mean, basically, it was myself and one or two more colleagues. And I said to Judy, I'm going on maternity leave, and 1 year later, when I come back, I will work on this. So I did. And this is where I started to get we started changing our approach from soft research into more policy and legislation. The first policy developments that I remember on web accessibility, they were at the very late 90s, 98, with a target of the year 2000. There we had a program called eEurope, in which we said that by the end of 2003, all public sector websites would be accessible. It was agreed by all the member states. A couple of years later, when the so-called new member state acceded the EU, we had Euro Plus, and they also agreed to make all the public sector websites accessible by 2003, which, by the way, was the European Year of Persons with Disabilities. We started seeing developments, and we saw the divergence of the implementations, the way into assessing accessibility, and so forth. And this is where, again, I mean, Eric came in the picture in a very prominent way as a lead figure on web accessibility, having developed really and being very engaged on the Dutch policies that they were bringing at European level. For us, it was really remarkable to see what was happening in the Netherlands, and the visibility of the work in the Netherlands at that time was really impressive. We saw really a big focus on the web accessibility rules, on how to check and measure accessibility. And as I said, we started seeing the divergences. So we came again with a policy initiative with the corresponding presidency at the time of the Union. There were council conclusions. Those are conclusions that all member states take together in 2003 that says that the member states will work to have a common methodology to achieve comparable data. Well, we are still working on that. But in those days, I remember working with Eric, offering the Dutch methodology. But also the French were coming with their methodology, Spain was coming with their methodology, Italy was coming with their methodology, and we needed a common methodology. So we put a lot of efforts and funding into having a common projects and developing trying to develop some standardization in this area. And I tried to find a picture of Eric with a T-shirt with all the logos of all the methodologies, but I could not find it. But the image is still in my memories. We have to realize that to have those standardization efforts or common efforts or consensus efforts with users, with industry that had their own interest and their own rules in the US, was without any legislation, was really a big challenge. We talked often about the stick and the carrot. We had the carrot, but we didn't have the stick at the time. So it is really very difficult to reach these common views or trying to ask people to do something concrete on accessibility when you do not have the legislative rules. So we started the Software, partnering with the US on developing, at least in Europe, common standards. We issued Mandate 376 at the time, where also Eric was participating. Previous speakers said that, and that led to one of the now leading standards, EN 31549. It was really a very important mandate that really we count with the support of the US to have, and we have a policy agreement that we will converge towards common standards. Of course, W3C was also there with the WCAG, but without reducing the level of accessibility that previous Section 508 had put. And this was not always easy to maintain because there were many efforts. It was not easy to maintain. So since then, and now I'm going to go to the situation today, the situation has significantly changed. Today, we have in Europe one of the most complete ecosystems on accessibility legislation. We have really a more balanced approach in which we use the perspective of human rights. So what we are trying to do is to ensure equal access of rights, the rights to access, the right to information, the rights to access services on equal basis with others. This is really a right that persons with disabilities have like anybody else. And we do that, we work to achieve that with two big instruments. One, accessibility of mainstream technologies. following a design for all approach, but also through reasonable accommodation. And that is really catering for the needs of individuals with disabilities at a particular moment for a particular function. And that includes the use of assistive technology, which is really personalized. So where we are today, we have important rules like the US have. I mentioned the Section 508. Well, we also have similar rules. Public procurers in Europe have to buy accessible, and they have to buy accessible everything, not only technologies. The European rules require that anything you buy, when it's going to be used by people, whether it's members intended for members of the public or members of the contracting authority, they have to, these products, services, infrastructures have to be accessible. And this is really an essential development that we need to make sure that it is really more and more implemented. We have rules for public sector websites, have been mentioned before. But we also have got rules, very strict rules, that when EU funds, in particular structural funds, social funds, cohesion funds, are spent, that they respect accessibility. So we cannot build in principle infrastructures, buildings, schools, libraries, reform cities or regions without considering accessibility, without breaching EU law. This is very important because although the enforcement is something that could be improved, it is already an obligation. And in that context, we have a new piece of legislation. And this new piece of legislation is the European Accessibility Act. It's a piece of legislation in which I worked for many, many years to get it through. And in summary, it puts obligations on economic operators, whether it is manufacturers, importers, distributors, or service providers of key technologies, some key technologies, to only place in the market those accessible technologies. We are talking about computers and operating systems, ATMs, ticketing machines, check-in machines, telephones, smartphones, TV equipment and related digital television services, telephony, access to audiovisual media services, certain elements of transport, websites, self-service terminals, check-in machines, banking services, electronic books, e-commerce. Any website where they sell something will have to be accessible, and access and answering and responding to the emergency number 112. They also have to be accessible by having real-time text and total conversation, so that persons who are deaf and hard of hearing will be able to use it. This piece of legislation is really very important. We are this year in June, in a couple of weeks, having an important deadline, that is the transposition. This is when member states have to have their own national laws based on the European directive. And then economic operators have another 3 years to make sure that from 2025, only products are placed in the market that are accessible, those products that I mentioned to you, and only services, those that I mentioned to you, will be accessible, provided in accessible formats from 2025. We are engaging into supporting this implementation with the member states, but also through the development of standards. Of course, this is complemented with national legislation because the built environment there is a strong component of national legislation in the built environment, but we are doing also European standards, and the Accessibility Act contains rules for the built environment where those services that I mentioned are provided. We are also providing encouraging measures that, like the Access City Award, that, by the way, it was won by Breda a couple of years ago. It's an award that we give every year to recognize remarkable efforts to improve accessibility in cities. All this brings me to the conclusion, saying that we see a future in which accessibility needs to be more present by following the law and following all these developments. We are today in a context of an educational setting where new professionals are trained in different areas of technology. And it is essential that those new professionals will be able to be competent on accessibility. We know that it is not the case. Persons like Eric and Roland and the previous speakers are rare as engineers, as technologists in Europe still. The majority of the schools, and I would like to congratulate Eric again for the position, but also the school, the university, the majority of universities, high schools, and so forth, do not have teaching on accessibility and technology. And while it is so much needed, I think the students here at the Han University will be really privileged in order to be able to learn on accessibility, but also what accessibility brings, which is diversity, is about human rights, is about a more inclusive society. And I'm sure that these new accessibility rules and these developments will foster new jobs, new opportunities, and new challenges. And it is essential that the students of today, the professionals of the futures, will be ready for matching those challenges. So we count we count on Eric and all of you to advance and to support the European developments, which at the end, it is your developments. It is what happens in Euros is what happens in the member states, in the regions, in all the local places of Europe. And I really hope that we will see that accessibility becomes more of a reality for all of us. We have seen the barriers that persons with disabilities experienced during the COVID pandemic, and we hope that those accessibility barriers will not be present in the new way of working and the new technologies that are going to come in society. So thank you for your attention, and enjoy the day. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Ima. I will continue in English. We will have a short break. We're 10 minutes ahead of schedule. So before we go to the official part, we have a break. And the break is here, something to drink. And I think, Franca, 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock we will continue. Okay.